Good evening. Tonight, we're talking about agreements, contracts, treaties, even your gym membership that you absolutely swear you'll use this year. These documents are the bedrock of our society, the solemn promises that keep everything from international trade to your Netflix subscription ticking along. We sign them, we trust them, we assume they mean what they say. But what if I told you that the entire system is built on a foundation of, well, let's call it linguistic quicksand? It's true. The very words that are supposed to bind us together are, in fact, floating in a void of assumptions, making every single agreement you've ever made potentially as stable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake. Now, you might be thinking, Ronald, that's absurd. We have courts, we have lawyers in expensive suits, we have giant, dusty books of law. Surely they've figured this out. And to that I say, you'd think so, wouldn't you? It seems so fundamental. But the truth is, the legal system has a colossal, gaping blind spot. And it's right there in plain sight, the language itself. We're going to dive into how this oversight makes a mockery of the certainty we crave from our legal documents. So, stick with me. Because by the end of this, you'll see that the ironclad contract you think protects your business, your home, or your rights might just be a collection of elegantly printed suggestions. And the implications of that are, to put it mildly, absolutely massive. It's a systemic flaw so profound that it calls into question the very nature of law and order. And tonight we're dragging it out into the light. It's going to be fascinating and just a little bit terrifying. Let's get into it. Let's start at the very beginning. Pick up any legal document, the U.S. Constitution, the Magna Carta, the terms and conditions for iTunes that you definitely read before clicking agree. Show me the part where it defines what a word is. Show me the section that explains how nouns, verbs, and adjectives are supposed to function to create meaning. You can't, because it isn't there. Not a single statute, contract, or constitution on earth begins by defining its own tools. It's like a carpenter showing up to build a house with a detailed blueprint, but without ever explaining what a hammer is or how a nail works. The entire system just dives right in, blithely assuming, that we all agree on what language is and how it operates. This is the original sin of the legal world. It's a staggering oversight. The law uses language as its one and only medium, its sole building block, yet it never bothers to secure its foundation. It's a system of rules written in a code that never defines its own syntax. Think about that. Every right you have, every obligation you're under, is expressed through a system that has no explicit foundational agreement on how its own core components function. It's as if the people who wrote the rules for global finance just forgot to define what numbers are. It's a level of foundational negligence that would be hilarious if it weren't so deeply concerning for, all of organized human civilization. So what we have is a system that is, from its very inception, ungrounded. It's a magnificent, intricate castle floating in the sky with no connection to the earth. The law speaks with immense authority, using words like shall, must, and is, as if these terms carry an intrinsic, unshakable power, but without a primary definition of the very medium being used. All of that authority is based on a collective, unspoken, and frankly unexamined assumption. An assumption that the word is means is. And as we're about to see when you start poking at that assumption, the whole magnificent structure begins to wobble quite precariously. So, Because the law doesn't ground language itself, it's no surprise that it fails to properly define its most important functional terms. I'm talking about the words that do all the heavy lifting in contracts and statutes. Words like reasonable, in good faith, due process, or fair value. These terms are everywhere. Your contract might say you need to give reasonable notice or that a company must make a good faith effort. What precisely does that mean? The contract won't tell you. The statute won't tell you. They are, for all intents and purposes, placeholders for a meaning that is yet to be determined. They are conceptually empty buckets waiting for someone to pour something into them. And who gets to fill those buckets? Judges. This is where the whole thing becomes a magnificent, high-stakes game of judicial improv. When two parties disagree on what reasonable means, they go to court, and a judge effectively makes it up. They'll look at precedent, they'll consider the context, they'll consult their gut, and they'll render a decision. The judge in Ohio might decide reasonable notice is 30 days. A judge in California looking at a nearly identical case might decide it's 60 days. A judge in Florida who just had a bad breakfast might decide it's 24 hours. There is no objective standard. It's a subjective interpretation masquerading as objective law. This isn't a bug in the system. It's a fundamental feature. The ambiguity is baked right in. Fair value for a company's stock can be one number according to one valuation model and a completely different number a week later with another. The phrase, in good faith, is a philosophical minefield. Does it mean honesty, in fact? Or does it also include observing reasonable commercial standards? Courts have disagreed for centuries. Every time one of these floating terms appears, it's not an instruction. It's an invitation to an argument. It's a choose-your-own-adventure book where the final chapter is written by a stranger in a black robe, and the outcome can change your life forever. There's a concept in law which basically means the law as it is laid down. It's the idea that the power of the law comes from the fact that it is written, declared, and enforced. It is what it is because we, or the people in charge, say it is. The stop sign means stop because the sign says stop. It's an incredibly simple and powerful idea, but it completely falls apart when you combine it with the problems we've just discussed. If the law is just a collection of words, and those words are ungrounded, and their key terms are undefined, then what exactly is being laid down? It's not a coherent system of meaning. It's an enforced assumption. The whole authority of rests on the premise that the words on the page have a stable, shared meaning. But they don't. We've established that. So what you're left with is the enforcement of an interpretation. It's not the law that's being enforced, but a particular judges or lawyers or bureaucrats of what the law means. The system pretends that words are like bricks, solid, reliable, and uniform, that can be used to build a solid structure. In reality, the words of the law are more like water vapor. They take the shape of whatever container you put them in, and that container is often the subjective mind of a person in a position of power. This transforms the rule of law into the rule of lawyers, or more accurately, the rule of the most persuasive arguers. If you can convince a judge that your interpretation of reasonable is the correct one, you win. The law becomes not a search for truth, but a contest of rhetoric. The etymology of a word, its historical roots, its component parts, none of that matters in a court of law. All that matters is precedent and persuasion. This means that the law this thing we hold up as our shield against chaos, is itself a system ignorant of its own linguistic DNA. It's a set of commands issued in a language that the issuer has never bothered to fully learn. Here is the grand, beautiful, and utterly infuriating irony at the heart of it all. There is a foundational principle of jurisprudence that you have absolutely heard before. Ignorance of the law excuses no one. You can't get out of a speeding ticket by telling the officer you didn't know the speed limit. You can't commit tax fraud and then claim you found the tax code a bit confusing. You, the citizen, are expected to know and abide by the law in its entirety, regardless of its complexity or your ability to understand it. Your ignorance is not a defense. It's a harsh rule, but it's considered necessary for an ordered society. But what about the law's own ignorance? What happens when the system itself is fundamentally ignorant of its own primary component, language? The law demands that you understand it, while it simultaneously refuses to define its own terms, ground its own medium, or provide any objective basis for its most critical concepts. It holds you to a standard of absolute knowledge while it operates from a position of profound linguistic ignorance. It's like a pilot demanding every passenger know the principles of aerodynamics, while the pilot themselves is cheerfully admitting they've never actually learned how to fly the plane. Don't worry, they say. We'll figure out what lift and thrust mean as we go along. This is the ultimate hypocrisy. The law, which excuses no ignorance, is itself built on a mountain of it. It's a system that can be dismantled, argued, and reinterpreted endlessly because its core is hollow. Every agreement is unstable because the language used to create it is unstable. And while you can be punished for not understanding the vague, floating terms laid down by the state takes no responsibility for its failure to provide clear, grounded, and stable language in the first place. You're responsible for knowing the unknowable, and that right there is how a system designed to create certainty ends up being the ultimate source of ambiguity. So, where does that leave us? It leaves us with a legal system that looks solid from a distance, but is terrifyingly fragile up close. Every contract, every law, every promise is built on the assumption that words have a fixed meaning, when in reality, they are constantly being negotiated and renegotiated by courts. The certainty we believe we are buying into with a legal agreement is, in large part, an illusion. The system works most of the time because we all tacitly agree not to poke at the foundations too hard. But when the stakes are high and disagreements arise, the linguistic cracks appear, and the whole edifice can come crashing down. This isn't just some abstract academic problem. This affects everything. It's why legal battles are so expensive and unpredictable. You're not just paying for a lawyer's time, you're paying for their ability to win a philosophical argument about the meaning of a single word. It's why international treaties can be interpreted in wildly different ways by different countries, leading to conflict. The instability of language is the secret engine of endless litigation and dispute. It ensures that no agreement is ever truly final, only temporarily settled until a new, more persuasive argument comes along. But acknowledging a problem is the first step to fixing it. What if we demanded more? What if contracts began to define their own terms, not by precedent, but by etymology and function? What if we started building a science of law based on a science of language? It's a monumental task, but it's not impossible. By recognizing that our entire legal world is floating on a sea of assumption, we can begin the slow, difficult work of building a new foundation, one based on linguistic certainty. Until then, remember, the next time you sign on the dotted line, you're not just signing a document. You're placing a bet. And the house, in this case, doesn't even know the rules of the game it's playing. Thanks for watching.